Hi, it's Will from AusMed. We're super excited to have partnered with Leaders Summit to bring you this online learning experience. Online learning works. It's low cost, fast paced, and genuinely helps providers build workforce capability at scale. To find out how you could give your staff access to the over 1,250 learning experiences from AusMed, fill in the form coming up on your screen now.
I'd now like to call to the table, or the podium, should I say, another group of young people, I think, relative to myself, Will Egan and Esther Monks. And the subject is the complexity of workforce demands, having a total rethink and how to deliver qualified and competent staff across home and residential care. So we've been in discussions with Esther and Will for some time about how do we fast track new staff coming in and keeping them, retaining them. So Southern Cross Care was saying in the South Australia, David Moran was saying in his CEO political wish list, another thing he was talking about is the fact that he gets young staff joining Southern Cross Care, but they leave within 6 months because they're challenged by the complexity of the work, the emotional challenge of dealing with elderly on decline and so on. And he said, our challenge is how do we, this washing machine of staff, and we've got to train them all the time. So it's absolutely appropriate at this point in time that Will and Esther tell us what the solution is. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So as Chris said, we are here to talk about how we totally rethink workforce underpinned by AI. My name's Esther Monks. I'm an industry advisor with Workday supporting the healthcare sector, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by Will, the CEO of AusMed. Chris, based on the bell curves yesterday, we are in the generation that will not let go of our skinny jeans, and we're both technology providers, so we will absolutely wear sneakers on stage. But apart from that, I can't claim what Will has, always having cut my teeth in technology. I think you built your first website in 1998.
That's right. Yeah,
when you were obviously
Pokedex.
Yeah, when you were back in nappies.
Yeah.
And for me, though, I've come from a finance background, and joining Workday was really around embracing an organisation that's really transforming the way that the back office operates, both across HR and finance. So this whole concept of AI can sometimes feel feel very futuristic. But by show of hands, who caught an Uber home last night or used Google Maps? Who maybe listened to Spotify and looked at their recommendations? AI is all around us. And the thing is when you can access AI on your mobile device, as all of our people do, and then we come to work, we put our mobile device away, we're downloading spreadsheets, we're copying data, we're trying to work out, well, what is the training and development that I'm supposed to do? We're applying for jobs, we're either not hearing back from them, or it's just a bit of a black hole. There's this massive disconnect in the way that we're living our lives day to day compared to the way that we're working at work. And so as organisations, as we lean into this space, there's a real opportunity for us to leverage technology that is moving at a speed of knots and really look at how do we automate, how do we accelerate the way that we work, how do we make it more meaningful, like the Spotify recommendations, and how do we really transform the sector? Now, to illustrate this and why machine learning is so exciting, I wanted to leverage a study that was done back in 2023 looking at generative AI at work. And it really unpacked the difference between traditional computing, which, for me, I remember back in university, consuming lecture information, reading information, and then, expecting an output. And that's what we're testing for. Compared to the power of machine learning, which can take training data or real-life examples from your SMEs, from the collective pool. So at Workday, we have 1 trillion points of data that we use in our training models to generate these outputs. How do we make sure that those outputs have context, that we understand what we're asking them to do? So for example, like Cameron was saying this morning, when we're looking at cancer diagnosis, we know that these are the things that we're looking for. And the thing with machine learning is it can then infer the best way to get from your training inputs to your outputs, rather than having this sort of rigid code of, this is the way that I've always gone to the airport, I've turned left, I've turned right. No, with Google Maps, we're able to allow AI and machine learning to say, this is where I want to go to. How do I get there? And so what can happen when you take all of your SMEs, all of the amazing data that we have as a collective industry, and put that in someone else's mouth? So this is what this study did. It created an AI assistant that it was able to then give to 5,000 customer service representatives of various tenure. And the results were that the resolutions for those customer service reps decreased, the number of resolutions per hour increased, the average handling time was able to be decreased, the share of resolved issues without having to escalate to a manager, also like that velocity and throughput. I mean, you can see based on the graphs, every metric moved in the positive direction. But when we look at who those employees really started to help, it was those with the least tenure, which you would sort of imagine. You know, you think of your most experienced registered nurses, whether they have an AI assistant or not, they're going to be able to create amazing patient outcomes. But you think about your new starters, your new graduates. How amazing would it be? And when you think about, you know, how we onboard new people, you know, especially pre-COVID, we would have someone sit alongside them and help coach them through the process. Imagine if we can replicate that through AI assistants and have those people really amplified across our workforce. The other component that I just wanted to touch on was, you know, that whole idea around ramping and onboarding, that time to expertise. What we noticed, well, what this study noticed was that those with the AI assistant were able to get to the same level of resolutions per hour than those who didn't have it, but in 2 months rather than 9 to 10. So that's 5 times the ramping time that AI was able to help onboard these staff. So probably goes without saying some of the benefits to the organisation: increased productivity, elevated performance, faster time to mastery, really durable skills and learning because you've got that real-time on-the-job learning. And for the employees and their clients, you know, higher satisfaction. Who's sat on hold to a call centre, or who's had families of clients waiting on hold just to understand, you know, basic information around, has something been paid, what services have been provided. And when we think about being able to increase that throughput, it's incredible. But it's not just within, you know, that client-facing or customer-facing areas that we can start to get these benefits. We really need to think about the back office as well, our workforce, our finance teams, our HR teams, our IT teams, and making all of them more efficient as well. Cameron Grayson gave really great examples around how healthcare is already embracing AI across the globe. This is from a study that Workday commissioned with IDC, looking at the US, Canada, and New Zealand geographies. And whilst organisations, especially over in North America, are really embracing AI in their back office, in their ERPs, healthcare executives are still really worried about, how do we do this sustainably? How do we make sure and balance the budget when we're thinking about patient-centred care and investment, when we've still got a back office that struggles with IT complexity? And with that IT complexity comes challenging data in silos, data that's inconsistent or incomplete. And so how do we make sure that we're uplifting the quality and, like the example given yesterday at MetQuick, really simplify the technology stack and really break down those data silos? So just to illustrate with a few examples, you know, Elevance Health in the US, they've been able, through our what we call a recruiter agent, and we'll touch on agentic AI in a moment, but they've been able to cover 72% of their open requisitions from candidates, not that are being sourced new, but that are already known to their ecosystem. If you think about every time you put a job ad out there, you have a whole pool of candidates. What happens to the candidate that missed out, that was like second in line, third in line, fourth in line? Imagine if you can leverage AI and machine learning to actually go back into that pool and fill 72% of your jobs or other open requisitions based on their skills with your existing candidate pool. Imagine then if, you know, you're surfacing more relevant candidates to hiring managers who are incredibly busy, who don't want to keep having to go back through and resource resumes. Advent Health saw a 40% decrease in the time it takes for hiring managers to review candidates and push them through. Going back to Elevance, they were able to reduce their time to issue contracts by 17 days just by getting people through the funnel faster. Compound that with, with AI assistance with onboarding and learning, it's an incredible way to really start to get people and talent in faster. Now, I did say at the start I'm a finance person, so I don't want to leave our CFOs out of the loop, but we are seeing so much around the back office as well, and that impacts the whole workforce. So Altru, who's sub 4,000 people, they've been able to reduce their AP approval times from a week to a minute by redesigning the process, by having automated and risk-based assessments push those things through. But what's really underpinning this is this idea around being able to drive from data to insights to action. How do we make it feasible for people to actually act on the information? And not just act on any old information, but really hone in on the things that are statistically significant. Where do I have the biggest retention risks? Where do I have the highest turnover? How am I assessing my employee sentiment? These are all tools that currently exist and are available, and a number of organisations who are in this room are already on that journey around leveraging AI and machine learning to really hone in on and make decisions around benefits, comp, etc., to really improve that employee experience. The key to all of this is, and this presentation is focused around workforce, but it's really understanding who are our workforce. There's so many organisations, and I've worked for many of them in the past as well, that have a payroll system that acts as their HRIS system. So how do we truly end up with connected data around our employees, who they are, what their competencies are and their skills? And then how do we make sure that we've got accurate enterprise data to really start to inform where we go? Now, 3 months ago, I probably would have gone into all of that in a lot more detail and stopped the presentation there. But as I said at the start, technology moves at such a rapid rate of knots. If you follow anyone from Salesforce, you're seeing about Agentforce, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that this afternoon. We are moving into the world of agentic AI. So what the heck is agentic AI? Well, this is where we're talking about moving from hyperautomation and recommendations and having that AI assistant to really have AI work as that autonomous decision maker. It's able not just to understand and recommend information, but actually start to make decisions on your behalf. Now, for me, as really thinking about how do we keep the human in the loop, this means that the way that we work is changing. If we think about that first example that I spoke about, around having that AI assistant, that's really representative of that chart on the left-hand side. Having people work alongside technology, having things like a co-pilot, like recommendations, surfacing where they are in their work. But what we're moving towards with agentic AI, and when you think about, that started from Cameron around 95% accuracy, I think it was, high 90s for cancer diagnosis. How are we actually thinking about what are the tasks that AI can do independently of a human with just humans having that oversight? I actually think whether it's things like reviewing contracts, recruiting, all of those types of things, this is a really exciting space because we actually start to shift the dial around what humans do. And underpinning all of this is really the question of what do humans do really well that we need the humans to continue to do? Absolutely, they're going to always be client-facing, but especially when we think about care management and the 10% cap on the ability to pass that on, how do we rethink our back office? How do we rethink the tasks that our HR professionals are doing, that our finance teams are doing? We're seeing 35% of recruitment time being able to be redirected. We're seeing 35% of accounts receivable clerks' time being able to be redirected. 20% for accounts payable. That's sort of a day to a third of someone's week, and the stats go on. So what does this mean for our organisation and the implication that it has? It really means that we can reimagine the roles and responsibilities of our organisations. We can think about agility, not just with upcoming consolidation in the market or continued consolidation in the market, but how we create that agile foundation and curiosity to continue to embrace artificial intelligence and technology across our organisation. But core to all of this is creating stakeholder buy-in. How do we make sure that our people are coming along the journey with us? How do we relate it back to how they're using AI in their everyday life? which no doubt they are using without even knowing that they're being influenced by artificial intelligence and machine learning. How do we recreate that experience and reduce that attrition that Krish mentioned? Because the work that they're doing is more enjoyable. I'm going to pass over to Will to continue taking us through this journey and
Thank you, Esther.
join you later.
Yeah, so I think, how do we actually do it? Providers of all sizes, how do we actually do it? What I want to talk about today in my segment is some examples of what we're seeing in the context of workforce capability. When we bring this up with customer conversations, we typically get met with three issues. Don't trust it, don't have a use case, so a thought around how to apply it, or don't have a budget. In my talk, I want to dispel all three of those myths. On the trust case, I think that our expectation around trust, just to start there, is that we're comparing that against perfection, not the performance of the human that would otherwise be doing that task. So in the example that Cameron gave, if you compare the performance of a model against the doctor's, the model's actually better, yet it's still inaccurate 5% of the time. So trust isn't about it being perfect, it's about its performance relative to humans performing the same task. In terms of a jumping off point, which is really the bulk of the focus of my talk, I think that the challenge is that a lot of people don't understand a point as to which they can make their investment. So what I want to highlight to you is a difference between the top of the stack of AI and the bottom of the stack. The bottom of the stack are the things that you typically read about in the media. At the very bottom, we've got infrastructure. So this is NVIDIA or Microsoft. Companies like Microsoft are inventing entirely new materials to improve the performance of compute overall. A business like OpenAI is not an infrastructure company. It's a company that's buying infrastructure and then it's building large language models that sit on top of that. OpenAI is the most heavily funded model producer, or LLM, large language model producer. They've raised around $17 billion of capital. And the view is, who will have the best model? There won't be hundreds of models. There'll probably be sub 10, maybe 7. Why do I say 7? Well, the Magnificent Seven are the largest tech companies in the world. They represent about a third of the entire US market capitalization at $16 trillion. So it's probably them, because capital is required. The cost to make investments into infrastructure is what gives you a competitive advantage. Unfortunately for all of us, we're probably not entering at that point either, given the fact we might need $17 billion to buy CPUs and GPUs to do it. What most of us actually get exposure to, though, is these generalized GPTs, generative pre-trained transformers or models that sit on top of those underlying foundational models. These are things like ChatGPT, made by OpenAI or DALL-E, but not the actual model itself. Copilot is another example of this. Those things are great, but they're ubiquitous. So if you incorporate those into your organization, you'll get performance, you'll get improvement and efficiency, but so will everybody else. So you'll only get it'll become a new there will be no incremental competitive advantage or performance that you're able to get. You might just fall behind if you don't adopt it. The opportunity really sits at this top of stack, building your own GPTs, implementing agents or agentic AI, or trying to take some of these things and put together entirely new interfaces or sets of APIs, programming interfaces, for your applications to communicate. The Australian government actually ran a pilot of implementing Copilot into the ATO, and they looked at the performance of the efficiency dividends that came from implementing that per day, per staff member that were participating in this. As you can see, there were 330, but just by using Copilot, these are the efficiencies that are available. We still see situations, I think it's quite prominent still, that Copilot policies and procedures exist that actually prevent staff from using Copilot. Again, that goes back to trust. It came up yesterday when I did a little trial run of this with someone, that trust is also an issue around patient data or consumer data. I agree, but all these systems, when you're paying for them as a proprietary application, don't share that underlying data with the models themselves, right? So they're ring-fenced out. My background's technology. You already store huge amounts of data in what's called SQL databases. Those are the databases that underpin the applications that you use today. Think of these LLMs as the equivalent of that. You've already got all that information online. So think of this as just two different data stores. I think some practical tips to implement immediately is if you don't already have a policy and procedure, not to go into the substance of that, but it's worth putting one of those in. We are seeing a lot of situations as well now start to emerge where in the absence of that, or at least some training or micro-learning around what it is that you accept or want your staff to be able to do or not do, we're getting training requests starting to come through. It's happening very quickly. Why? Overnight, about 2 weeks ago, Gemini went from being a paid add-on to a Google account to something that was included by default. So suddenly, if those that use Google products, Copilot might end up being the same. They're suddenly in the interfaces that all your staff are using, whether you like it or not. In some cases, impossible to turn off as well. This is the pervasiveness of technology companies. Moving on to something more nuanced though, creating your own pre-trained transformers. So what this is about building your version of ChatGPT. I'm going to use that as a metaphor, but it doesn't just need to be a chat-based interface. It could be a verbal interface. A big part of what AI has brought us in the past 2 years is verbal interfaces. Verbal interfaces is that natural language experience that we have. None of us type at the speed at which we think. We talk at the speed at which we think, maybe. But verbal interfaces unlocked our ability to interact with computers and information. So I think I'll use the GPT in a chat context for now, but I think where it's going to really land and come to the fore is in these verbal interfaces, and I'll have an example in a second. You can use products like Copilot and OpenAI to produce these internally. I have one at AusMed. We've uploaded all of our risk management documentation and processes. Probably the most boring part of my job, to be honest, reading these, writing these, helping other people write these. And then we've provided it with templates and examples of how those risks need to be identified and documented for our risk management system so they can be uploaded in there. Any staff member can access this. They can dump in project documents or product requirements or proposals to customers, and it'll run through a process to identify the new risks that might be in there and correlate those with existing risks in the business and flag them. That's an example of that. Underneath these platforms is programmable versions of this, right, which is the kind of things that we would use if we're building applications. But something that people don't know about a lot of AI is that it's a natural language programming experience as well. So it's not just a natural language prompting or verbal, but actually the programming is. You can see an example here right at the bottom. The content. Through API, we give the endpoint a role and we give it instructions on how it wants to behave. It's kind of no different. Data is a big part of making this work. You've got a lot of data in your organisation already. I've listed just huge amounts of systems that are storing all of this data. If you were to put all this together into what we would look at it from a program perspective, this is called an entity relationship diagram. What we're interested in is how this data connects to each other, not just how it exists in its own right. So we're not just after a data point like a report or a KPI or a metric, we're after the relationships that sit behind this. Here's a simpler example. If we look at an episode of care, essentially that's two interactions between two humans, a provider of care and a recipient of care. Most of our interest right now is around rostering, but where we're moving is looking at the skill mix, the supply of care. So what is it that we're able to do, or this person, this individual member of our workforce is able to do for this consumer, and what are the needs of that consumer? So we're going to kind of go to a second degree on rostering, but on a whole lot of other decisions. A second example of pattern matching, which Esther's talked about. So you already have large volumes of training data. Incidents, root cause analysis. This represents a really great summary of something that went wrong between those two humans in the past, and a really great digital summary of these attributes that sit behind both the carer, the things you see on the left there or the right, and the consumer. An agentic future actually probably involves us replaying these incidents over your current rostering schedule in advance to identify potential new incidents that might emerge so that you could mitigate those in the future or change the roster. All of healthcare systems at the moment are focused on two problems globally, and AI is going to play a big part in solving the second: capacity and capability. Capacity is just about sheer headcount. G20 nations have aging populations and increased expectations from their voter base to fund high-quality healthcare and aged care. but that's not going to be able to be hired our way through, as we know. So it's going to really come down to building capability. How do we determine what it is that our workforce knows, and how do we take a systematic approach to upskilling them so that they can work more efficiently? Care minutes are a constraint to that, because even if you can provide great quality care faster, the person may need to spend longer there than necessary. Workforce capability is about knowledge, skills, attitudes, and competencies. So it's really about understanding that individual and understanding what they know, and then building that capability over time. All of this sounds like blue sky thinking. It's not, but unfortunately this is a little bit small, but we're in an industry where we are a laggard industry. I go back to that jump off point. Despite Esther's stat, around 88% of providers in the context of the EMR integrating AI, more broadly across healthcare service provision, we're kind of the most lagging industry. So I want to give you an example of something that we're working on at AusMed with Nick Hansen at Ozcare. We're looking at supporting a home care workforce to reflect on difficult incidents of care post a client visit. So these are essentially remote and isolated workers. They might have had a bad incident in their first client for the day, and they may have 4, 5, 6 more thereafter. We want to enable them to engage in a reflective practice session, elevate or escalate anything to a manager so that we can support a greater kind of scope of control, or a higher ratio of reporting of care workers to managers, and then ensure that those learning moments are captured for the individual and bedded down. At a high level, here's how the model works. I'm going to go 1 minute over, if that's all right, Chris. We're going to leverage the car interface verbally, so think CarPlay, Android Auto, create a structured interaction, and then provide follow-up both to the worker and the manager. This is what this looks like in more detail. Sitting around the entire model will be an escalation system. So the way that you improve trust is all of AI is about probabilities and relationships. If there's things that we care about perfectly, then we just dial the probabilities up to 100%. So if the model gets close to that, then we force it to go in a certain direction, or talk about things in a certain way, or shut down the conversation and escalate it to a manager. That's how we intervene. But there's 4 big stages here. One is facilitating the reflective practice. The second is providing contextual guidance to that individual verbally in the car about Ozcare's workplace policies and procedures. Also, any regulatory information. It'd be great if regulators were publishing that in API format so we could just ingest it. Recommend training to them based on the library of resources that we know Ozcare would have that staff member would have access to. And then do things like send the staff member a summary email of that conversation and those action items. Send the manager, with permission from the staff member or through that monitoring and escalation, a manager summary, and even integrate into a system like Workday and add some of these observations to their performance notes. So I'll finish there. We've got key takeaways, but maybe do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The challenges that we're facing, they're just being amplified. So how do we leverage technology to really help to solve some of these, enabled by culture? AI is here, agents are here. It's really a new era for the workforce. So how do we think about how we do it differently and partner with organisations, as Will said, who are really investing in this space, and build the right foundations? Now, I'll give you a tip. So you don't have to scan each QR code. If you do just want to take a photo of this and understand some of the different events that we're having both next week, May, with AusMed for their ongoing training and development, just take a photo, and then you can actually afterwards, this is a community service announcement, you can actually touch the QR code and it will prompt you out to the link. So the other community service announcement, if I may, Chris, was one that we discussed last night at dinner. So if you are wanting to get an espresso martini or an affogato, get a decaf one after midday, and it will change your life. But please do continue the conversation, and we'll hand back to you, Chris. Thanks for allowing us to go a little bit over.
Okay, thank you very much. Great presentation in terms of making us aware we're agenta AI in particular. But I think some people might have missed your example, and we've discussed this before, Will. You're using the example of the person going out to their car, and you had Ozcare as the example. So in case you missed what they were saying there, a person who's visited a client in their home it's been an unusual experience, and the person has walked out to the car, got in the car, and said, shit, that was pretty horrible. It was horrible, I didn't enjoy it because of the experience, but also I don't have confidence in my knowledge of what occurred there and how I should respond. Yeah. So that person's role really is to get in the car and drive to the next location. But what AusMed and Workday are working towards is that person would sit down and have a conversation with AI and say, this is what I went through. I don't feel I have the competence in these areas. And the response will come back and firstly understand that they need to soothe the person and say, you know, we understand the situation.
It's surprisingly empathetic.
Beg your pardon?
It's surprisingly
empathetic. Developed by people like yourself in Melbourne. And soothe the person and then say, okay, the things that you've missed out on, or you may have missed out on, are A, B, C, and D. So before you drive away, let's spend 5 minutes going through that so that you know where you could have performed, and actually you've done, so that the person can say, well, I did 80% of that. Well done. You've done 80%. Here's the 20% that you didn't know about. Okay, are you ready to go on to the next location? Yes, I am. At the same time, that interaction will be fed back to head office, and the algorithms will say, this is something that we haven't had training in, and we need to work on that. And instead of them being given a 1-week course or sent off somewhere, a micro course would be created that might only be 3 minutes, and that will be sent out to all the people who do the same thing, saying, this might be something that you haven't experienced, but it has happened last week, so this might help you. And the person can learn whilst they're driving around the car.
Exactly.
Is that right?
And through that agent, ideally, that course is assigned to that person without a learning and development person having to perform that task. So it closes the loop, the work's complete.
But equally, I suppose, for the next person looking at that client, they know that this is the likelihood and prepare them before they go in. So when we were having these conversations, I found that very exciting. So AusMed, and why I asked Will to come and speak, is that these micro learnings on demand for a particular small incident is where AusMed is going. So when you've got staff and you say, well, we need to train them in all of this, the system is actually saying, we're going to we know you do all this, so rather than going back and revisiting this because you've failed one component, we're going to top you up on this small area.
And Chris, if I may just add to that, when we think about accessibility, one of the benefits of large language model is that ability to translate real time. So when you think about the workforces that support our clients, often the time is that their first language might not be English. And so that ability then to converse in their first language, have an AI assistant be able to converse back and then translate it back into English for head office, is incredibly powerful. And this is the sort of place where development's taking us around really kind of trying to, remove the barriers to providing great care and learning.
I think maybe, without giving myself a Guernsey which is a term we have down in Victoria for an AFL jumper, but for next year's conference, if it goes well, perhaps Nick and I can get up here and share or even if it doesn't go well, share what happened.
Okay. All right, can we show our appreciation? Thank you.
Thank you.